Today, we're jumping into something pretty incredible. We're going to explore the system the earliest Islamic scholars built to protect the Prophet's teachings, drawing from the introduction to one of the most important books on the subject, Sahih Muslim.
I mean, really think about that question for a second. How do you keep something pure and perfectly accurate across centuries, with all the potential for human error, misinterpretation, and just things getting lost in translation? So how did they do it?
You have to understand, for the first Muslims, the words of the Prophet were a sacred trust, a literal guide for life. This is the story of how they built an intellectual fortress around that trust to make sure it would last forever.
All right, let's get into it. It all starts with the companions, the people who learned directly from the Prophet himself. In those early days, something started to shift. They began moving from this general feeling of trust to a much more active and honestly necessary state of verification.
This right here, this quote from Ibn Abbas, is basically the inciting incident. He's saying, look, we used to share these teachings freely because, well, why wouldn't we? But then when people started getting careless with it, rode high and low is such a great phrase for it, they had to hit the brakes. The game had changed.
And that's the takeaway. This was the exact moment where good faith and trust just weren't enough anymore. A new gold standard was being born. And that standard was all about verification. You had to prove it.
Okay, so that seed of caution was planted. Now let's see how it grew with the next generation, the successors. They're the ones who took this idea and turned it from a cautious habit into a core principle of the entire religion.
Wow, this quote from Muhammad bin Sirin just raises the stakes completely, doesn't it? He's making it crystal clear. This isn't just about collecting historical anecdotes. This is the very foundation of your faith. So you'd better be absolutely sure about who you're getting it from.
So why the sudden intensity? Well, this new, rigorous approach was really forged in a period of major social and political chaos, a time known as the fitna. And during that turmoil, the need for absolute proof became non-negotiable.
And here's the solution that popped up. Ibn Sirin tells us that before all the conflict, people didn't really ask for sources. But once the fitna kicked off, the question became sharp, direct, and essential. Tell us about your men. In other words, who told you that and who told them? This simple question, who are your men, gave birth to a revolutionary system of verification called al-isnad. The best way to think about it is like a chain of custody for information. It documents every single person who passed down a teaching, all the way from the scholar writing it down, back, link by link, to the Prophet.
So, how did this work day to day? Well, the logic was super straightforward, but incredibly rigorous. First, you hear something. Your immediate response is, okay, who'd you hear that from? Then, you trace that chain of names all the way back. And here's the crucial part. You investigate every single person in that chain. Were they honest? Was their memory known to be rock solid? Every link had to be strong.
And here's what's so wild about this system. It was completely uncompromising. It wasn't enough for someone in the chain to just be a good, devout person. The system prized objective, verifiable accuracy above everything else.
I love how the great scholar Abdullah bin al-Mubarak put it. He said the isnad, that chain, is literally a part of the religion. Why? Because without it, anyone could just make things up and say the Prophet said it. The isnad was the shield that protected the message.
And this difference is so important. The system recognized that a person could be totally sincere and still get things wrong. We all misremember things. So for a narrator to be accepted, they had to have two things, a righteous character and a precise, verifiable memory. One without the other just wouldn't cut it.
This quote might sound a little harsh at first, but it shows just how committed they were to precision. They weren't saying that good people were intentionally lying, not at all. They were saying that even the best people can make mistakes, and when it comes to the Prophet's words, those unintentional mistakes are a really serious problem. That's why everyone had to be scrutinized. So you have generations of scholars doing this painstaking, meticulous work, building this incredible system. So what was the end result of all this effort?
You can really see the story of how it all evolved. It starts with the companions, where that initial trust gives way to caution. Then the successors, who are dealing with the fitna, demand proof, they demand the isnad. And finally, the early scholars come in and codify all of this into a full-blown science.
And that was the whole point. Through these incredibly high standards, checking every person, verifying every link in the chain, demanding absolute precision, they did it.
They protected the purity of the message so that it could be passed down intact through the centuries.
It kind of leaves you with this big question to think about, doesn't it? For any legacy, whether it's religious, scientific, or artistic, what does it really take to protect it from being worn down by time and human imperfection? It's something to chew on.